The idea of drawing with something unusual, like chocolate or diamonds or garbage, is an excuse for you to experiment the process of representation in a very diverse and alternative way. Actually, that helps you really understand what you're doing. If you just keep doing the same thing, you never get to anything. But going back to what you're saying about pragmatism, one thing is what the artist does in the studio, but that's not art. The results of it are only art when there's there's another part involved, which is the viewer.
And that's where your photographic delusions make the greatest impact.
I think because I'm very conscious of the fact that the artist only makes half of that moment. The other half is the viewer that brings it in. So the art only happens when there's somebody looking at a picture or an object. And at that moment, you have to consider that the viewer, independent of who or she or he is, it comes with a huge baggage of learned visual experience that is going to, be set against what you just did. And that the result, the friction between the experience of the viewer and what you just did is like actually is that this sublime moment when you see art happening. We're having an exhibition here in Bloomington, and I think that art happens in exhibitions, not in artist studios. The artist studios is the rehearsal. You bring people in sometimes, but when you have a show, you can really hang around and see how people respond to what you're doing. I'm become very mindful of working with that visual baggage that the public brings in ways that when I started showing work, I remember going to Brazil and having my parents come to my exhibitions. My parents never set foot in a museum before I had a show in one. So when they come, they feel very disconnected. They feel that they don't understand. As a young artist, I wanted to impress my public with my knowledge and my technique. It's natural. People, young artists tend to do that. But I think as I became more mature, if I ever did, especially in this sense, I became more aware. It was much more interesting to work with that visual archive that the viewer brings. So that's why normally I tap into this poster and T-shirt store iconography of James Dean, Jim Morrison, that kind of thing. That I love images that everybody's seen a million times, and when they see it another time, it'll be slightly different, and that difference will create a vacuum that they will feel compelled to fill with lots of questions. I think I always work with icons, archetypes, stereotypes, images that you take for granted, and I think but when you look at them, they're not quite what you think they are. That makes that encounter something very interactive and interesting. It's a little bit of a discussion. So when the viewer looks at one of my pictures and say, "Oh, I know what that is. That is a pencil drawing of a paper plane." And then upon close inspection, you would see that it's not a pencil drawing. It's actually a photograph of a wire sculpture. It was probably done after, but it's three-dimensional. How big was it originally? When was it done? And before you know, you're not just looking at something, you're actually thinking about the way you look at things. And this is what I want to engage the viewer. So that kind of discernment, that is pragmatism that I want to infuse and I want to promote with my work. Perhaps with the hope that if I make things that engage the viewer into thinking about modes of seeing, that experience will echo in his or her experiences throughout when he's seeing other families of things. So, but we in our school system we're very good at dealing with media that was invented 3,500 years ago. Reading, writing, numbers, but we still haven't come up with a method for teaching our children to learn to read images.